The coffee had gone cold in my hands untouched. A pale swirl of cream floated on the surface, breaking apart into islands, dissolving slowly as if it too had given up. I stared at it without really seeing it. The phone call still echoed in my ears, vibrating in my chest like a cruel drumbeat. I could not silence. I had asked one simple question. Where do I sit at the table, Daniel? My son's voice, sharp and dismissive, carried no warmth, no trace of the boy I had raised. He didn't hesitate, didn't stumble, didn't show the smallest flicker of regret when he answered, "Sit back, Mom. It's all live streamed." My hand trembled, and the coffee cup rattled against the saucer. The sound startled me, but not enough to pull me from the sting of his words. A live stream, an invitation to watch from behind a screen while everyone else shared laughter, conversation, and clinking glasses at the family table. It wasn't just about dinner. It wasn't just about a meal. This was our family's table, the one I had polished every Thanksgiving, the one I had stretched with extra leaves at Christmas, the one I had sat at with tears in my eyes the day I signed the mortgage papers, to keep this roof over our heads when Daniel's father died. And now, I was not just excluded, I was mocked. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, hoping he might take it back, hoping he would soften, laugh, say it was just a joke. But silence stretched between us, suffocating and heavy, until I finally whispered, "You don't mean that." His voice was colder the second time. "It's better this way, Mom. We'll set up a live stream for you. You'll see everything. You don't have to be there." Click. The call ended. I set the phone down slowly, my fingers stiff and reluctant. My heart pounded against my ribs. I felt hot and chilled all at once, like shame itself had seeped into my bloodstream. The house was quiet too quiet. I rose from the chair, my knees stiff, and walked into the dining room. The table sat there, polished to a soft glow, waiting. The chairs around it stood like silent witnesses, every one of them carrying the imprint of 1,000 meals shared, stories told, arguments made, reconciliations found. I reached out and traced the wood with my fingers. I remembered Daniel at 10 years old, balancing on the edge of his seat as he begged for just one more slice of pie. I remembered him at 16, elbows on the table, sulking because I wouldn't let him borrow the car. I remembered him at 21, head bent low, whispering to me about the girl he thought he might marry. Every memory was carved into this wood. Every sacrifice I made was anchored to this table, and now, he had decided I no longer belonged at it. I sat down heavily in my chair, the one I always used, the one at the head of the table. For a moment, I closed my eyes. The ghosts of laughter filled the silence, faint echoes of a life I had built with my own hands. My throat tightened, and I fought to keep the tears from falling. This wasn't just about exclusion. This was a declaration. My son was telling me that my place in the family had been erased, replaced with a camera, a screen, a digital barrier. I opened my eyes and whispered to the empty room, "After everything I gave up for you." Flashbacks came like a flood. I couldn't stop. Nights of working double shifts when Daniel was little, too tired to eat, but still finding the strength to read him bedtime stories. Selling my grandmother's heirloom necklace just to pay for his college textbooks. Turning down a promotion because it required travel and I refused to leave him alone. Every choice I made bent toward his well-being. And now, when I asked for nothing but a chair at the table, he told me to sit back and watch through a screen. The shame turned into something else. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it hardened. Anger. I rose from my chair and walked to the cabinet where I kept my most important papers. My hands moved almost on their own, rifling through folders until I pulled out the stack of documents no one ever bothered to ask me about. Deeds, titles, contracts. Because while Daniel and his new wife thought they owned this home, while they thought they controlled the table and the invitations, the truth lay in my hands. The house was still mine. Every square foot of it. Every nail, every window pane, every chair around that table. I had never transferred the deed. I had never given up the final hold on the only thing that tied this family together. A spark ignited inside me. He wanted me gone. He wanted me erased. From the table? Then perhaps he should learn what it really means to lose something. The phone buzzed on the counter. A message from my cousin. "Can't wait to see you at the dinner tomorrow. You'll be sitting next to me, right?" I stared at the words and my lips curled into something between a laugh and a sob. No, I wouldn't be sitting there. Not tomorrow. Not ever again. But Daniel and his wife would learn that choices have consequences. I walked back to the table, sat down again, and pulled a pen from my purse. On the notepad in front of me, I began to write a list. Guests, family members, friends, every person I knew who was invited to that dinner. My pen scratched furiously, faster and faster, until the list stretched down the page. Names, dozens of them. Beside the list, I drew a single line and wrote 3 words that pulsed with the fire inside me. They will know. As the evening settled into silence, I pushed the list away and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me that wasn't sadness, wasn't sacrifice. It was power. I had been mocked. I had been humiliated. But I still held the one card they didn't even realize existed. And as I sat there in the dim light, the thought took root, deep and unshakable. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The list sat in front of me like a coiled serpent, waiting to strike. Each name scrawled on the page carried a memory, a story, a moment of sacrifice that had stitched my family together. Yet here I was, written out of the very fabric I had sewn. I picked up the paper again, smoothing its edges with trembling fingers. My cousin's text still lingered in my mind. She assumed I'd be sitting right next to her tomorrow. Everyone assumed I would be there. Why wouldn't they? For decades, I had been the center of every gathering, the one holding the family together with recipes, laughter, and gentle reminders of who we were. And now my son had decided I was no longer needed, that I should watch from behind a screen. While they toasted, laughed, and carved into the roast I had taught him to season, my lips pressed into a thin line. No, I whispered to the silence of the room. Not this time. I gathered the deeds and contracts once more, laying them out neatly in front of me like weapons on a battlefield. The house was mine. The land was mine. Every stone in the driveway, every tile in the roof, every chair around that polished wooden table belonged to me. They had forgotten that. Or perhaps they had assumed I would never use it. The phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a cousin or a friend. It was Daniel's wife, Clara. Her message was as sharp and calculated as her smile had always been. Just confirming you'll have the live stream link tomorrow. It's going to be beautiful. Less stress for everyone this way. Less stress. My blood heated. Was I such a burden now? After years of carrying Daniel through every hardship, of sewing his clothes when we couldn't afford new ones, of selling my jewelry so he could attend university, was my very presence now considered stress? I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering above the reply button. 100 words blazed through my mind, each sharper than the last. But in the end, I typed nothing. Words would not be enough this time. No. This would require action. I stood and began pacing the length of the dining room, the notepad clutched tightly in my hand. For each name on the list, I envisioned the moment they would find out. The moment they would discover that the house where they gathered, the table they laughed around, the home they thought was Daniel's kingdom, had never left my grasp. The thought tightened something in my chest, not guilt, not fear, but anticipation. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. I went to the hall closet and pulled out the photo albums, their spines cracked and worn from decades of use. I spread them across the table, flipping through page after page of birthdays, graduations, weddings, Christmas mornings. Each face smiled back at me, blissfully unaware of how quickly a family can turn cruel when power shifts. I stopped at a picture of Daniel, 12 years old, sitting proudly at the table with a birthday cake in front of him. His eyes shone with joy, and mine, visible just at the edge of the frame, shone with pride. I traced his face with my fingertip. "Where did you go, my boy?" I murmured, but the boy in the photo was gone. In his place was a man who could erase his mother with a single phone call. The evening stretched into night. I couldn't sleep. I paced, I wrote. I tore pages out and rewrote them. At last, I found myself seated at the desk in my bedroom, the glow of the lamp illuminating the pen in my hand. I began drafting a letter. Not a message, not a call, but something tangible, undeniable. A letter to Daniel and Clara. "Daniel," I wrote, "since you feel I no longer belong at the family table, perhaps it is time I remind you whose table it really is." The words poured from me like fire, sharp and deliberate. By the time I finished, the letter was thick with sentences that could cut him to the bone. I folded it neatly, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it shut with trembling hands. I placed it next to the deeds, a silent promise of what was to come. Morning came with a pale sun and a hollow quiet. My phone buzzed constantly, family members sending cheerful messages about the dinner, cousins posting photos of their outfits, friends chattering about the menu. Each notification felt like a blade, twisting deeper into the wound. Finally, just as I thought the phone might never stop, it rang. Daniel's name lit up the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. I answered, my voice flat. "Hello, Mom," he said briskly, as though nothing had happened. "Just checking in. You got the link, right? Clara wanted me to remind you. The setup's going to be perfect. You'll see everything." I stayed silent. He filled the silence with nervous laughter. "This is better, you know. No pressure, no tension. Just relax and watch. We'll call you after." Finally, I spoke. My voice was steady, deliberate. "Daniel, do you remember who paid for that house you live in?" The silence on the other end stretched so long I could almost hear his heartbeat. Then slowly, he answered. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer. I simply ended the call. My hands shook, but not with fear, with power. For the first time in years, Daniel had been reminded that I wasn't just his mother. I was the foundation. Under his feet, I tucked the letter and the deeds into my handbag and sat by the window, watching as the day stretched toward evening. The dinner would begin soon. Guests would arrive. Laughter would fill the rooms. Cameras would be set up to capture every moment I had been denied. And when they least expected it, when the room was full and the live stream was rolling, I would act out as I sat there, the shadows lengthening around me. A memory rose from deep within a memory I hadn't touched in decades. The day Daniel's father died, I had stood in this very room, clutching a folded flag and a child who couldn't stop crying. I had promised him we would survive, that this house would always be his home, no matter what. I had promised myself I would never let him feel abandoned, and now, he had abandoned me. The anger hardened further, crystallizing into something sharp and unbreakable. The doorbell rang. I froze. Who could it be? Hours before the dinner, I walked cautiously to the door and opened it. Standing there was a man I hadn't seen in nearly 30 years. Gray hair, weathered face, eyes that once knew every secret I held. "Margaret," he said softly. My breath caught in my throat. "Norman?" The sound of Norman's voice sent a chill down my spine. 3 decades had passed since I last saw him, yet in that single word my name time collapsed. Memories I had buried beneath years of responsibility and silence surged back with a force that left me dizzy. I gripped the doorframe for balance. "What are you doing here?" His eyes, still the same piercing blue I remembered from my youth, searched mine with quiet intensity. "I heard about tomorrow, and I thought you might need someone on your side." I wanted to slam the door, to send him away before the past collided with the fragile threads of my present. But the truth was, I was alone. My own son had cast me out, and here was Norman, an echo of a life I had once imagined, a man who had once promised me everything. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. "Come in." Norman walked into the house with the same quiet confidence he had carried all those years ago. His presence unsettled me, and yet, strangely, it also soothed me. I had forgotten what it felt like to be looked at as though I mattered. We sat at the dining table, the same table my son had banished me from. Norman ran his hand lightly across its polished surface. "Still here," he murmured. "Just like you." I folded my arms. "Why now? After all these years?" He leaned back, eyes never leaving mine. "Because I heard whispers that your son is hosting the dinner of the year, that you weren't invited, and I knew what that would mean for you." The words stung more than I cared to admit. My humiliation had spread beyond the walls of my own family. People were talking. People knew. "And what do you want, Norman?" I asked sharply. He hesitated, then leaned forward. "To help you, to stand beside you. I owe you that much." I almost laughed. "You owe me nothing." But deep down, I knew. He was right. He owed me everything. For once perhaps, he was here to make good on that debt. The air between us was heavy with unspoken history. I busied myself by pouring us both a glass of water, anything to avoid the intensity of his gaze. When I set his glass down, he reached for my hand. "Margaret, you don't deserve this. Not from your own child." Something inside me cracked. The anger I had been holding back for days surged to the surface, spilling out in words sharper than any blade. "They erased me, Norman. My own son erased me from the table I built, the home I carried on my shoulders. They told me to sit back and watch it on a screen like some forgotten spectator. Do you know what that feels like?" His hand tightened around mine. "Yes," he whispered. "I do. We sat in silence for a long moment. The ticking clock in the hallway seemed louder than ever, each second driving home the urgency of what tomorrow would bring. Finally, Norman spoke. Then don't let them do it. Take back what's yours. Remind them whose table they're sitting at. I looked at him, searching his face for signs of mockery, but there was none. Only conviction. And how exactly do you propose I do that? I asked. He smiled faintly. You already have the power, Margaret. The deeds, the house, the leverage. All you need is the courage to use them. I leaned back, letting his words sink in. He was right. The power had always been mine. I had simply been too afraid of shattering the illusion of family to wield it, but fear had no place here anymore. Not after what Daniel had done. The conversation shifted then, slowly at first, then with a steady rhythm that felt natural, familiar. Norman and I talked of old times, the nights we had spent dreaming of futures that never came to be, the laughter we once shared. Beneath the weight of years and regrets, there was still a spark, and in that spark, I saw an opportunity. Norman, I said carefully, what if I didn't just remind them? What if I exposed them? He tilted his head. Expose them how? I opened the drawer and pulled out the envelope, the letter I had written to Daniel. Norman read it in silence, his eyes narrowing as he reached the final line. When he looked up, there was admiration in his gaze. This will hurt him. Good, I said firmly. He should know what it feels like to be cut open. Norman nodded slowly, then leaned forward. But a letter is private, too easy to ignore. If you really want to make them feel the weight of what they've done, you need something public, something unforgettable. The idea made my pulse quicken. And what do you suggest? His smile was slow, deliberate. Show up tomorrow, not as a guest, not as a mother begging for a seat, but as the owner of the house. Walk in front of everyone, and take your place. Make them face you where they cannot hide. The thought was terrifying, and yet thrilling. We planned deep into the night. Norman sat across from me, sketching out ideas on scraps of paper, weaving a strategy that would turn tomorrow's dinner into a reckoning. For the first time since Daniel's call, I felt alive. Every detail mattered: the timing, the words, the evidence I would carry. By the time we finished, I had a plan stronger than any I could have built alone, and Norman was right. The humiliation had been public, so the justice would be to last. When the clock struck midnight, Norman rose to leave. I'll be here tomorrow, he said softly, pausing at the door. You won't face them alone. I nodded, though my chest tightened with conflicting emotions. Thank you, Norman, he smiled faintly. It's time they learned who you really are. After he left, the silence of the house pressed in on me once more. I sat at the table, staring at the envelope and the deeds. The plan we had made was bold, maybe reckless, but it was mine. And tomorrow, they would learn the truth. Just as I rose to head upstairs, my phone buzzed again. I nearly ignored it, but curiosity made me glance at the screen. An anonymous number. A single message. Don't show up tomorrow. You'll regret it. The words froze me in place. My hand shook as I read them again. Who had sent it? Daniel? Clara? Someone else entirely? The threat hung in the air like smoke, seeping into every corner of the room. For the first time that night, fear whispered at the edges of my resolve. But fear would not win. I straightened my back, deleted the message, and whispered to the empty room, let them try. Tomorrow, everything would change. Morning light broke across the curtains, but instead of warmth it brought a cold certainty. Today was the day, the dinner, the evening when my son and his wife would host nearly 100 guests in the house I had built, in the dining room where every memory of our family lived, while I was meant to sit at home and watch it on a screen like an audience member at my own life. I had not slept. The anonymous text still burned in my mind. Don't show up tomorrow. You'll regret it. But regret was already my constant companion. I had nothing left to lose. I rose from the bed with a resolve that hardened with every step. The plan Norman and I had sketched the night before echoed in my mind. I would walk into that dinner not as an outcast, but as the owner of the house, as the mother who had been silenced for too long. The morning hours passed in a haze of preparation. I chose a dress I had not worn in years, one my late husband had once said, made me look untouchable. Its deep shade of emerald caught the light as I laid it across the bed. I slipped it on slowly, almost ceremonially, and pinned my hair the way I used to when dignity mattered more than convenience. As I looked at my reflection, I hardly recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the weary mother waiting for scraps. of love. In her place stood someone sharper, stronger, prepared for battle. At noon, Norman arrived. He looked at me with quiet approval. "You're ready." I nodded, though my heart pounded in my chest. "I have to be." He handed me a folder. Inside were copies of the house deed, bills, and legal papers, all proof of what I had given, all proof of what they had taken for granted. "This is your shield," he said, "and your sword." I tucked the folder into my bag, its weight both frightening and comforting. By late afternoon, the neighborhood was alive with activity. Cars lined the street, expensive suits and glittering dresses filed up the walkway of my home. My home. I watched from the corner as the guests entered, their laughter spilling into the air like a cruel reminder of where I was supposed to be. Norman touched my arm. "It's time." My legs felt heavy as I walked toward the front door. Each step carried me closer to confrontation, closer to the moment that would shatter whatever fragile bond remained between me and my son. When we reached the door, Norman gave a firm knock. The sound echoed through the hallway. Inside, for a heartbeat, I wanted to run, but before I could act, the door opened. It was Clara, my son's wife. Her face froze the instant she saw me, as though a ghost had appeared. "You?" she whispered. Then louder, sharper. "What are you doing here?" I lifted my chin. "Coming to dinner." Her hand tightened on the doorframe. "You weren't invited." I pulled the folder from my bag and held it up. "This is my house. Every guest in there is eating under my roof. I don't need an invitation." Gasps rippled from the guests nearby, who had turned to watch the exchange. Clara's face flushed crimson, but before she could respond, Norman stepped forward. "Are you going to make a scene at the door, Clara? Or are you going to let her in, where she belongs?" For a moment, Clara looked ready to slam the door, but the weight of the eyes around her forced her back. She stepped aside. "Fine," she spat. "Come in, but don't think you can ruin this night." I walked past her into the house, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Each step was a declaration. I am here. I am not erased. The dining room was breathtaking. Candlelight flickered against crystal glasses, polished silverware gleamed, and the table stretched long and proud. My table, my memories, my sacrifice etched into every corner. Conversations faltered as I entered. Heads turned, whispers sparked, and at the far end of the room, my son rose from his chair. "Mother?" His voice carried shock and a trace of anger. "What are you doing here?" I placed the folder on the table before him, taking my place. The room fell silent. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We spoke about this." "I told you. You told me to sit at home and watch from a screen like a stranger." I cut in, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "You told me my years at this table meant nothing, that my sacrifices were invisible. But here I am, Daniel, and I will not be erased." A murmur swept through the guests, some nodding, others exchanging uneasy glances. Clara moved to Daniel's side, her voice sharp as glass. "She's trying to humiliate you. Send her out before she ruins everything." But Daniel hesitated. His eyes flickered to the folder on the table, then back to me. He knew what it contained. He knew I held the truth in my hands. For a moment, I thought he might soften, might remember who I was. But then his expression hardened. "You shouldn't have come." The words struck like a slap, but I held my ground. "And yet I did. Because this house is mine, Daniel. That table you sit at is mine. And whether you like it or not, I am here." The tension in the room was electric. Guests shifted uncomfortably, caught between loyalty to their host and curiosity about the unfolding drama. And then, a voice from the far end of the table broke the silence. "Let her speak." It was one of Daniel's colleagues, a man I had met only once. His tone carried authority. Others echoed him. "Yes, let her speak." Suddenly, the room was no longer Daniel's. It was mine. I reached for the folder, pulled out the deeds, the bills, the documents that proved every brick of that house had been carried by me. I laid them across the table, each page a blade cutting through years of neglect. "This is my legacy," I said, my voice ringing through the silence. "And you tried to bury me beneath it. But I will not disappear quietly." Gasps rose again. Clara's face twisted in rage, Daniel's in shock, and then, just as I thought I had claimed my victory, a voice rang out from the doorway. "Interesting," it said smoothly. Every head turned. A man I did not recognize stepped into the room, dressed impeccably, carrying a briefcase. He set it on the table and opened it with deliberate calm. "Because I happen to have documents of my own." the room stilled. My chest tightened. Who was he? He pulled out papers and slid them across the table toward Daniel. Daniel's face drained of color as he read them. Claire's eyes widened, then narrowed with satisfaction. Finally, Daniel looked up, his gaze cutting into me like a blade. Mother, you should have stayed home. The air in the dining room had grown heavy, thick with confusion and dread. Every flickering candle seemed to strain against the silence, and all eyes fixed on the man who had just stepped through the doorway. He stood tall, confident, his briefcase now open on the table like a weapon. I felt my stomach knot as he pulled another set of papers from inside. My voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. Who are you? He gave me a smile, cool and practiced. My name is Victor Hale. I represent the firm that now has an interest in this property. My chest tightened. Interest? Yes, he said, placing the papers directly in front of my son. Your son reached out to us months ago. These documents, he tapped the folder, outline a transfer agreement. Your house is no longer yours. Gasps echoed across the table. I staggered back, my hand gripping the edge of a chair. That's impossible, I said, my voice trembling. You cannot sell what isn't yours to give away. Victor's smile didn't falter. That is where you are mistaken. I turned my gaze to Daniel, my son, the boy I had raised, the man I had once believed would protect my name. His face was pale, but his eyes carried something darker, something I had never seen before. Daniel, I whispered, tell me this isn't true. He said nothing. He only stared at the papers, his jaw clenched. Clara leaned in, her lips curling into a victorious smirk. Why don't you tell her, Daniel? She deserves to know. My heart hammered in my chest. Tell me, finally. Daniel spoke, his voice cold and measured. You signed it away. The words crashed over me like a wave. What are you talking about? He pulled a single paper from Victor's folder and held it up. My eyes locked onto it, my breath catching. It was my signature. My name, scrawled in ink, declaring the house transferred into Daniel's possession. I shook my head, the room spinning around me. I never signed this. Daniel's expression twisted. You did, months ago. You remember when you asked me to help you with those medical bills? You were overwhelmed. You said you trusted me. You signed the documents I gave you that day. No, my knees weakened. No, I didn't understand. I thought. My voice broke. I remembered that afternoon, the stack of papers he had slid in front of me, telling me they were forms for insurance. My trust had blinded me. The room buzzed with whispers, the guests leaning forward, caught in the storm of revelation. Norman rose from his seat, his voice ringing with anger. This is fraud. She never knowingly signed away her rights. You manipulated her. Victor's calm smile never faltered. Fraud is a strong word. Everything here is legal. The signatures are valid. The transfers are filed. Whether she understood or not is irrelevant in the eyes of the law. My body trembled, my throat dry. Daniel, how could you? His eyes flicked away from mine. Because I was tired of living under your shadow. This house was never going to belong to me unless I took it. You made the rules for too long. Now it's mine. A sharp ache tore through my chest, but anger surged with it, hot and consuming. I gave you everything. I built this home brick by brick while you were a child. And this is how you repay me. Clara's laughter cut through the silence like broken glass. Repay you? You should be grateful. You'll still have a room when you need it, if you behave. But the rest of this, it belongs to us now. Gasps rippled again. The humiliation burned through me, but I stood straighter, my hands gripping the table. This house was my legacy, I said. And if you think I'll let you erase me, you're wrong. Victor gathered his papers neatly, sliding them back into his briefcase. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that settles it. The ownership is no longer in question. Your hosts, Daniel and Clara, have every right to this home. The guests murmured, some nodding, others exchanging uneasy looks. The room that had briefly belonged to me now felt like a cage closing in. But then Norman spoke again, his voice steady. There's one thing you're forgetting, Victor. A signature may transfer property, but intent matters. And if this goes to court, a jury will see what happened for what it is: deception, manipulation, and betrayal. Victor's smile thinned. Court battles are expensive, long, messy, and in the meantime, she will have nothing. Are you willing to risk that? The words were a dagger. He was right. They had stripped me bare in one calculated move. But deep inside, something refused to break. The fire in me, dimmed for too long, roared back to life. I looked at Daniel, my voice sharp and clear. You think you've won, but this isn't over. Not by a long shot. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided my gaze, others offered me small looks of sympathy. The perfect dinner had fractured into chaos, and I knew I had to act before the night ended in my complete defeat. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on Clara. You laugh now, but remember this moment, because one day, it won't be you holding the cards, it will be me. Her smirk faltered for just a second, enough to remind me that even the most confident opponent can be shaken. Then, from the corner of the room, a voice I hadn't expected spoke. Actually, it said, there may be something she can do. Everyone turned. It was one of the guests, a woman I recognized faintly, an attorney who had once represented a family friend. She stood, her eyes sharp, her voice steady. If what you say is true, and she signed those papers without understanding their nature, then this is a matter of undue influence. A court would not look kindly on a son tricking his mother into signing away her home. It's not as hopeless as you think. The room buzzed again. Victor's smile flickered, Daniel's jaw clenched, Clara's hand tightened on her glass until it nearly shattered. And in that moment, hope sparked. Small, fragile, but real. I straightened, my voice ringing louder than it had all evening. Then let them try. Let them drag me through court. Let them smear my name. Let them waste their money on lawyers. I will fight, and I will not stop until everyone sees the truth of what you've done. Daniel's eyes blazed with fury, but beneath it, I saw something else, fear. For the first time that night, the balance shifted. Victor snapped his briefcase shut. This isn't over, but I suggest you consider your options carefully. You may find the cost of your pride higher than you can pay. He turned and walked out, the weight of his presence lingering even after he was gone. Daniel sank back into his chair, his hand running over his face. Clara whispered something in his ear, but his expression was troubled, uncertain, and I stood taller, stronger. I had been blindsided, humiliated, betrayed, but I was not broken. Not yet. The candles flickered, the murmurs rose, and I looked around the room at the faces staring back. Some pitied me, some admired me, some feared me, but they all knew one thing now. I was not going quietly, and as I met Daniel's eyes across the table, I made him a silent promise. This war had only just begun. The guests had finally left, their whispers trailing into the night like shadows. The grand dining room stood in ruins of its former elegance, half-empty wine glasses, scattered crumbs, and the lingering tension that clung to the air like smoke. I sat at the head of the table, the chair that once symbolized my authority now feeling like a prison of memories. Daniel and Clara had disappeared upstairs, retreating into whispers and closed doors, but their absence did not ease the ache gnawing inside me. My hands trembled as I traced the rim of a forgotten glass, my mind circling back to Victor's papers, to my signature staring at me like a scar. I had been tricked, lied to, betrayed not by strangers, but by my own blood. The words still rang in my ears. You signed it away. My body felt drained, but my spirit refused to bow. For the first time in years, I could feel the quiet stir of something powerful within me, a fire of survival, of vengeance. Then, as if on cue, the sound of footsteps entered the room. It was Norman, his face grim but determined. He placed a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. You're not alone in this, Margaret. I met his eyes, a flicker of gratitude breaking through my exhaustion. They've taken everything, Norman. My home, my dignity. How do I fight against my own son? Norman's voice was firm. By remembering who you are. You built this life. You built him. And you're not going to let them bury you alive. The next morning, I found myself staring at the rising sun from the window of my bedroom. Its light painted the walls gold, but all I saw was the coldness of betrayal. Clara's laughter from the previous night echoed in my head, her words like venom. If you behave, you'll still have a room. I clenched my fists. They thought they had won, but they had underestimated me. Later that day, I received a call. It was the woman from the dinner, the attorney. Her voice was sharp, brisk, the voice of someone used to slicing through lies. Margaret, she said, I reviewed what I could last night. You still have a chance, but you need to be ready for a fight. I swallowed hard. What do I have to do? First, gather everything. Any documents, any records of that day your son gave you those papers. Even the smallest detail could matter. Then we'll build a case on undue influence and lack of informed consent. Her words sparked hope, fragile but real. Yet even as she spoke, doubt clawed at me. Could I really win against my son? Against Clara, who seemed to have poisoned his heart? I thanked her, promised to call again, and hung up. That evening, I confronted Daniel in the kitchen. He stood with his back to me, pouring himself a drink. You lied to me, I said, my voice steady but burning with accusation. He didn't turn around. You signed, Mother. It's done. I stepped closer. You knew I didn't understand what I was signing. You tricked me. You wanted the house, and you took it. Finally, he turned, his eyes cold, his mouth a hard line. You never let me have control of anything. You clung to this house like it was your crown, never trusting me to run things. I was tired of being treated like a child. The words sliced into me. So you stole from me? That's how you prove you're a man. Before he could respond, Clara entered, her smile sharp as a blade. Why waste your breath, Daniel? She'll never accept that this is our home now. She thinks she still holds power. Her smugness was unbearable. You're poisoning him, I snapped, turning him against his own blood. Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. Oh, Margaret, you still don't get it, do you? He didn't need me to turn him. He's been waiting for years to take what you wouldn't give. All I did was show him how. I stared at her, stunned by her brazenness. But then her eyes glinted with something darker, something that made my breath catch. Later that night, while searching through my desk drawers for old papers, I stumbled across an envelope I didn't recognize. It was tucked beneath a stack of forgotten receipts. My name wasn't on it, but curiosity gnawed at me. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were letters, handwritten. My eyes scanned the first one, and my stomach dropped. They were from Clara, not recent, but years old. Letters to Daniel, filled with venom, dripping with manipulation. Words that urged him to cut ties with me, to take what he deserved, to claim the throne of the family before it was too late. Each line seared me. Clara had been planting seeds of betrayal long before I even suspected. She had built this trap piece by piece, feeding Daniel's resentment until it consumed him. My knees weakened as I clutched the letters. This wasn't just betrayal. It was orchestrated, planned. I thought of Daniel's words at dinner, of Clara's laughter, of Victor's smug confidence. They weren't just playing a game of ownership. They were waging a war for my very existence. The next morning, I confronted Clara in the garden. She was sipping tea, draped in luxury like a queen who believed the kingdom already belonged to her. I dropped the envelope on the table. I found your letters. Her eyes flicked to them, then back to me, unflinching. And you poisoned him against me, I said, my voice trembling with fury. You wrote these lies, fed him resentment until he couldn't see me anymore. Clara leaned back, her smirk never fading. It wasn't hard. He was already halfway there. You made him feel small, Margaret. All I did was give him a voice. I slammed my hands on the table. You destroyed my family. She met my gaze, calm and ruthless. No, Margaret, I created one, a stronger one. Without you, the audacity, the sheer cruelty, left me breathless. But then her voice lowered, each word deliberate. And if you think waving those letters around will save you, go ahead. Daniel will deny it. He'll side with me. He always will. Her confidence shook me, but only for a moment, because I realized something. Clara's arrogance was her weakness. She believed she had already won, but in revealing the truth, she had given me a weapon. That night, I called the attorney again, my voice steady. I have evidence, letters, proof she manipulated him. The attorney's reply was firm. Hold on to them. They could be the key. But Margaret, be careful. Once they know you have those letters, they'll stop at nothing to silence you. Her warning echoed in my ears as I held the letters close to my chest. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt the tide shifting. They thought they had trapped me, stripped me of power. But I had a weapon now, and I would use it. The house was quiet, but inside me, a storm raged. Betrayal had cut deep, but it had also awakened something fierce. I stood at the window, watching the darkness outside, and I whispered a vow to myself. They mocked me. They tricked me, but I will not fall. This house will not be their victory. It will be their downfall. The letters burned in my hand like fire, a promise of retribution. And as the night swallowed the house, I knew this was only the beginning of a war that would tear us all apart. The letters sat before me on the kitchen table, The ink faded, but the venom fresh as the day it was written. Claire's handwriting looped across the pages like a snake slithering in the grass, whispering poison into my son's ear. I had read them so many times that the words were seared into my mind. Each sentence was another knife, another confirmation that this betrayal had been crafted long before I saw it coming. But this time, as I read, I felt something different. Not despair, not shock. No, this time I felt clarity. They thought I was weak. They thought age and grief had dulled me, that I was too tired to fight. But they were wrong. I had been asleep, yes, but now I was awake. And when a mother awakens, she becomes a storm. I tucked the letters into a folder, sealed it, and placed it into my handbag like a soldier holstering a weapon. I would not let their laughter be the last sound in this house. Later that morning, I met the attorney in her office downtown. Her name was Evelyn Sharp, and she lived up to it. No nonsense, no wasted words. She adjusted her glasses as I laid the letters before her. She scanned the first page, then the next, her eyes narrowing. Finally, she looked up. This is manipulation, clear and deliberate. If we can connect this to the signing of the house, you may have grounds to challenge the transfer. My heart pounded. You mean I can take it back? Evelyn leaned forward. Possibly, but it won't be easy. Your son and his wife will fight tooth and nail, and trust me, they won't play fair. You need to be prepared for an ugly war. Her warning did not scare me. If anything, it steeled my resolve. I'm ready, I said. Evelyn's lips curved into the faintest smile. Good, then we begin. That night, I returned home to find Daniel waiting in the hallway. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. Where were you? He asked, his voice cold. I don't believe I owe you explanations, I replied, his eyes narrowed. You're up to something. I can feel it. I stepped closer, meeting his gaze without flinching. And if I am, Daniel, what then? For a moment, the boy I raised flickered in his eyes, a shadow of the child who once clung to my hand. But then Claire's influence rose like a dark tide, drowning him. You're done fighting me, he said flatly. This is my house now, my rules. He pulled something from his pocket and dropped it onto the table. My keys. Every key I had, front door, garage, even the garden shed. I changed the locks, he said. From now on, you ask me if you want to come or go. My chest tightened. My own son, reducing me to a guest in my home. But I forced myself to stand tall, to mask the rage boiling inside. You think you've won, I said quietly. But you haven't seen the last of me. He smirked, cruel and certain. We'll see. The humiliation was unbearable, but I would not let it break me. That night, I slipped into my room, clutching the folder of letters against my chest. They could change the locks, strip me of my keys, but they could not take away what I knew. I called Evelyn and told her what had happened. Her response was sharp. This only strengthens your case. Document everything, every insult, every action. We'll turn their cruelty into evidence. I agreed, but a knot of fear twisted in my stomach. I knew Clara was cunning, but Daniel's eyes haunted me. He had once been my son, my flesh and blood. Now he was my jailer, and yet, even as the walls closed in, I reminded myself, storms do not bow to cages. 2 days later, Norman arrived unexpectedly. His face was pale, his movements restless as he stepped into the garden where I sat. Margaret, he began, his voice uneasy. We need to talk. I rose to greet him, relieved at first. Norman, thank goodness. You won't believe what they've done, changing the locks, treating me like a prisoner. But I have proof now. Letters, Claire's letters. We can fight this. But Norman did not share my fire. Instead, he looked away, his hands trembling. I know about the letters. I froze. What do you mean? His eyes finally met mine, filled with something I couldn't name: shame, regret, fear. Daniel came to me. He knows you've been meeting with an attorney. He knows about your plans. My heart lurched. How could he know? Norman's silence was the answer. I stepped back, the realization crashing over me like icy water. You told him. Margaret, listen, Norman pleaded, his voice cracking. I didn't want to, but he threatened me. He said if I didn't tell him what I knew, he'd ruin me, my job, my family. I panicked. His words struck harder than any insult Clara had ever hurled. This was Norman, the one I trusted, the one who stood by me that night after the dinner, the one who swore I wasn't alone, and now, he had betrayed me too. You were the only one I trusted, I whispered, my voice breaking. I'm sorry, he said, tears in his eyes. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just didn't know what else to do. But his apology felt hollow, drowned by the weight of his betrayal. That night, I sat alone in my room, the house eerily silent around me. The folder of letters lay in my lap, but its power now felt fragile, exposed. If Daniel knew about them, then my advantage was slipping through my fingers. I thought of Norman's eyes, the desperation in his voice. Another person I thought I could lean on, now lost to fear. The walls of the house seemed to close in tighter. Each room, once filled with memories, now felt like a trap. I was surrounded not just by enemies, but by traitors. But as tears burned my eyes, something inside me hardened again. If they wanted a war, they would get one, even if I had to stand alone. I would fight. The next morning, a letter arrived at the doorstep. Not Clara's letters, but a new one, this time from a law firm. It was addressed to me. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. Daniel and Clara had filed for a restraining order against me. They were trying to cast me out of my own home. The paper trembled in my hands as I stared at the words stamped across the top in bold, merciless letters. Restraining order. It was surreal. I, Margaret, who had spent decades cooking meals, scrubbing floors, singing lullabies under this very roof, was now labeled a threat in my own home. The woman who had sacrificed everything for her son was now the intruder, the unwanted presence. I sank into the armchair, the letter crumpling slightly beneath my grip. My eyes scanned the accusations again, each one more absurd than the last. According to Daniel and Clara, I had become unstable, erratic, and verbally abusive. They claimed I created a hostile environment, that my presence endangered their peace of mind. My laugh broke out sharp and bitter. Peace of mind? These were the same people who mocked me at the family table, who locked me out of my own rooms, who stripped away every ounce of dignity I had left. Now they were painting me as the villain. I read further. The restraining order requested that I vacate the premises immediately, with no right to return until a hearing was scheduled. And even then, they would argue for permanent removal. A cold chill slid down my spine. They were not just trying to humiliate me. They wanted me gone for good. I called Evelyn immediately, my fingers fumbling over the phone screen. She answered on the second ring, her tone brisk. Margaret, I expected this. You expected it? I asked, my voice cracking. Yes, I told you they wouldn't play fair. They're building a case to erase your rights entirely. But don't panic. A restraining order is temporary. We'll fight it. But they're twisting everything. I whispered. They've turned my love into hostility, my fear into violence. How do you fight lies? With truth, Evelyn said firmly. You still have those letters, don't you? Yes. But Daniel knows about them now. Norman told him. There was silence on the line, a silence heavy enough to make my heart sink. That complicates things, she admitted, but it doesn't destroy your case. Margaret, listen to me carefully. This is the moment where they expect you to crumble. Don't. Every move they make, we counter. Every lie, we expose. You are not powerless. Her words steadied me like a hand on my shoulder. I nodded, even though she couldn't see. I won't back down. Good, Evelyn replied. Then let's prepare for war. Later that afternoon, 2 uniformed officers arrived at the door. Clara greeted them with a theatrical gasp, as if she were the victim in a play only she could script. There she is, she said, pointing at me with a trembling hand. She's been unstable. We don't feel safe with her here. I wanted to laugh at her performance, but the presence of the officers made my throat tighten. Ma'am, one of them said gently, we're here to escort you out of the property until the court hearing. Do you have somewhere to stay? It felt like the floor had vanished beneath me. I had lived here for 40 years. Every corner, every photograph, every creak of the floorboards belonged to me. And yet in that moment, I was nothing but a trespasser. Clara's smug smile burned into my memory as I gathered a small bag of clothes and the folder of letters. Daniel stood behind her, his arms crossed, his eyes hard. Not once did he meet my gaze. I paused at the door, turning back to look at them both. My voice was steady, though my heart was breaking. You can force me out of this house, but you cannot erase the truth. This will not end the way you think. Clara tilted her head, mock pity in her eyes. We'll see, Margaret, we'll see. And just like that, the officers led me out. I spent that night at a small motel on the outskirts of town. The walls were thin, the bed stiff, but it was the first time in weeks I could breathe without Clara's presence suffocating me. Yet even as I tried to rest, questions gnawed at me. Why this urgency? Why this ruthless push to drive me out completely? Clara had the house in her name already. She had Daniel's loyalty. What more could she possibly want? I pulled the letters from the folder again, scanning them for answers. And then, halfway down one page, I noticed something I had overlooked before. Once she's gone, the inheritance will be ours entirely. Daniel, you must make her step away now, before she changes her will. Timing is everything. My breath caught. Inheritance. This wasn't just about the house. This was about everything: my savings, my investments, even the small nest egg I had set aside for my grandchildren. Clara wasn't satisfied with my home. She wanted my life's work, my legacy, my future. It hit me with brutal clarity. Driving me from the house was only step one. Step two was erasing me entirely from the picture. The next morning, I met with Evelyn again. I laid the letter before her, my finger tapping the incriminating line. This is it, I said. This is what she's after. Not just the house. Everything. Evelyn's eyes scanned the words and I saw a spark of fire light in her expression. This changes everything. If we can prove coercion tied to financial gain, this is no longer just a property dispute. This borders on fraud, even elder exploitation. The words sent a shiver through me, but also a surge of strength. For weeks I had felt like a ghost in my own life. Now finally, I had something concrete. A weapon. Margaret, Evelyn said, her voice steady. They've escalated. Now we escalate too. We'll gather witnesses. We'll bring in experts. If Clara thinks she can bleed you dry, she has no idea who she's up against. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not a bitter smile, but one of determination. Then let's show her. That evening, as I returned to the motel, I found an envelope slipped under my door. My stomach tightened as I bent to pick it up. The handwriting was unmistakable. Clara's. I tore it open, and a single sentence stared back at me, written in bold ink. You think you're clever, Margaret, but secrets don't stay hidden forever. The envelope lay open on the motel bed, its single menacing sentence etched into my mind like a scar. You think you're clever, Margaret, but secrets don't stay hidden forever. I sat frozen, the paper trembling in my hands. Clara was taunting me, daring me to respond. But more than that, she was telling me she had something on me, something she believed could break me. For the first time, fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve. What secret could she mean? What leverage did she think she had? My life had been nothing but service to my family, years of sacrifice and loyalty. And yet, as I sat in that dim motel room, I felt the weight of a past I thought was long buried. I folded the letter slowly, sliding it into my bag with the others. I couldn't afford to let Clara's games shake me. Not now. Not when I was finally preparing to fight back. The next morning, Evelyn met me in her office. Her desk was piled with documents, witness statements, and a stack of folders she had gathered overnight. She didn't waste a second. Margaret, we've built the foundation, she said firmly. We have your medical records proving you're of sound mind, testimonies from neighbors who've seen how Clara treats you, and financial records that highlight sudden transfers into accounts in her name. This is enough to cast serious doubt on her story. I leaned forward, gripping the armrests of the chair. But what about her letter? She threatened me, Evelyn. She said secrets don't stay hidden. What if she twists something from my past? Evelyn's sharp gaze fixed on me. Is there anything at all that she could use against you? My mind flickered back decades, to a time I hadn't thought about in years. A decision I had made in desperation, when money was scarce and survival seemed impossible. My pulse quickened, my palms damp. There was a loan, I whispered. After my husband died, I took out a private loan under a friend's name. I paid it back, but it was irregular. If Clara found that paperwork, she could spin it as fraud. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained calm. It's not ideal, but it's survivable. She'll use it to paint you as dishonest, but compared to her pattern of exploitation, it's weak. We'll control the narrative. Do not let her see your fear. I nodded, drawing a deep breath. Evelyn was right. Clara thrived on fear. If I let her see mine, she would win. The hearing day arrived like a storm, heavy and relentless. I walked into the courthouse with Evelyn by my side, my heart pounding, but my chin lifted high. Daniel and Clara were already there, dressed impeccably as if they were attending a gala rather than a battle for my life. Clara's lips curled into a smirk when she saw me. She leaned close to Daniel, whispering something that made him chuckle. Under his breath, I clenched my fists but kept walking. They wanted me rattled. They wanted me small, but I would not give them that satisfaction. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. As the proceedings began, Clara's attorney painted a picture of me as a bitter, unstable woman who lashed out at her son and daughter-in-law out of jealousy and spite. Every word was a dagger, slicing through the years of love I had poured into my family. When it was Evelyn's turn, she rose with a quiet authority that commanded the room. She presented the medical records first, the doctor's notes confirming my sound mental state. She called neighbors who testified to hearing Clara yelling at me, to seeing me locked out of my own home. She showed the bank statements, highlighting transfers that bled my accounts into Clara's control. Piece by piece, the narrative shifted. The courtroom murmured, the judge's eyes narrowing as Evelyn built the case. For the first time, I saw Clara's composure falter, but just as victory felt within reach, Clara stood. Her voice was steady, her tone confident. Your Honor, while my mother-in-law paints herself as the victim, she has not been honest. I have here documentation of a fraudulent loan she took out under another person's identity, a crime she never disclosed to her family. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My stomach dropped as she pulled out a folder, holding it high for effect. Daniel looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes filled with betrayal. Is that true? He demanded. I couldn't find my voice. I wanted to explain, to tell him it was desperation, survival, not malice. But the words caught in my throat. The judge's gavel struck once, silencing the room. We will examine this evidence. Clara's smile returned victorious. For a moment, I thought it was over. That evening, back at the motel, I sat with Evelyn, despair pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. She's twisted it, I whispered. She's turned my survival into a weapon. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice sharp. Margaret, listen to me. Yes, the loan is messy, but it does not erase what she's done. You repaid it. It hurt no one. Meanwhile, she's exploiting you. Now, in real time, in ways the court cannot ignore. We can still win this. But you must be strong. Her words steadied me, but only slightly. Deep down, I knew Clara wasn't finished. She had more cards to play. 2 nights later, I got the call. It was Norman. His voice was strained, panicked. Margaret, he said, I need to see you. I made a mistake. My chest tightened. What do you mean? Clara promised me a share of your estate if I testified against you. I thought it was harmless, but she's planning something bigger. She's digging into your medical records, trying to prove you're unfit. I thought you should know. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there in silence, the pieces falling together. Clara wasn't just after my house or my inheritance. She wanted my entire identity dismantled, my credibility destroyed. And she was using everyone, Daniel, Norman, the courts, to achieve it. But Norman's confession gave me something she hadn't planned on: leverage. Proof that she was bribing witnesses, manipulating testimonies. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint spark of hope flare again. Clara had overplayed her hand. The next day in court, Evelyn presented Norman's statement. The judge's eyes widened as the betrayal came to light. Clara's manipulation. Exposed for what it was, Clara tried to object, her voice rising, but the damage was done. For the first time, the balance shifted fully in my favor. The judge called for a continuation of the hearing, his tone stern. Clara's face blanched as whispers filled the room. She turned to me then, her mask cracking, her eyes burning with fury. She mouthed one word across the courtroom, her voice too low for anyone else to hear, but clear enough for me. War. That night, alone in the motel, I stood at the window, looking out at the darkened street. Clara had shown her hand, but she was not done. She would stop at nothing to strip me bare, to erase me entirely. But she had underestimated me. For too long, I had been silent. For too long, I had been small. That was over. If Clara wanted war, then war she would get. The morning of the final hearing felt like standing at the edge of a storm. My body was tired, my spirit bruised, but my resolve was sharper than ever. Clara had called this war. I intended to finish it. As I dressed, I thought about every insult at the family table, every mocking laugh, Every night I lay awake wondering how my own son could betray me so thoroughly. They thought they had broken me. They thought their cruelty would drive me into silence. But what they never understood was that silence could turn into steel. When Evelyn arrived to drive me to court, she carried a single folder. She held it like a weapon. "Margaret," she said, her eyes steady, "this is everything we need. Norman's confession, your neighbor's testimonies, proof of Clara's financial manipulation. Today, we don't just defend, we strike." Her words were the spark I needed. I stepped into that car not as a victim, but as a woman prepared to reclaim her dignity. The courtroom was packed that day. I saw familiar faces, neighbors, distant relatives, even strangers who had followed the case after hearing whispers of the scandal. Daniel sat beside Clara, his jaw tight, his eyes darting nervously. Clara, however, looked as poised as ever, her smile calm, almost smug. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and the air thickened with anticipation. Clara's attorney opened with a predictable attack, waving the papers about my decades-old loan. He called me dishonest, manipulative, a danger to my own estate. Clara's face was serene, as though she was already envisioning her victory. But when Evelyn rose, the room shifted. She started slow, deliberate. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and commanding, "my client has endured months of calculated cruelty at the hands of her son and his wife. But this case is not about bitterness. It is about truth, and the truth is far darker than the picture they've painted." She laid out the documents one by one. The medical evaluation confirming my sound mind, the neighbors who testified about Clara's mistreatment, the bank records showing unexplained transfers. Then she called Norman to the stand. The room hushed as he shuffled forward, his face pale with shame. He cleared his throat, voice trembling. "Clara promised me money if I testified against Margaret. She told me to lie. She said if I helped her, I'd get a cut of the inheritance." Gasps erupted in the courtroom. Clara's mask cracked. For the first time, she stood, her voice shrill. "He's lying. He's bitter. He's trying to protect her." The judge banged the gavel. "Order." But Evelyn wasn't finished. She held up the final paper in her folder. "Your Honor, we also obtained emails between Clara and Norman detailing the bribe. The evidence is undeniable." The silence that followed was electric. The judge's gaze turned icy as he looked at Clara. "Mrs. Lawson, do you have an explanation for this?" Clara stammered, her words tangled. Daniel looked at her in disbelief, his hands trembling. For the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen in months, doubt flickering in my son's eyes. The judge recessed to review the evidence, but the courtroom buzzed like a hive. People whispered, pointing, shaking their heads. Clara's pristine reputation, the facade she had built, was crumbling in front of everyone. When the judge returned, his tone was firm. "The evidence of manipulation, financial misconduct, and attempted witness tampering is overwhelming. I find Clara Lawson guilty of exploitation and contempt. As for the petition to remove Margaret Lawson from her estate, it is denied in full. Furthermore, restitution will be considered for the financial losses inflicted upon her." The gavel struck. Just like that, the war was over. The room erupted in murmurs, reporters scribbling furiously. Clara's face drained of color, her body rigid. Daniel sat frozen, staring at the floor as though the world had collapsed around him. I stood slowly, my heart pounding, but my chin high. For the first time, I felt the weight of months lift off me. I had not only survived, I had won. Outside the courthouse, the cameras swarmed, questions flying. "Mrs. Lawson, how do you feel? Do you have a message for your family?" I paused at the steps, the sun warming my face. I looked straight at the cameras and spoke with steady resolve. "My message is simple. No one, not even family, has the right to strip you of your dignity. If they try, you fight. You fight with every ounce of truth you have, because silence only feeds cruelty. And I will never be silent again." The crowd erupted, my words carried like fire. I wasn't just speaking for myself anymore. I was speaking for every soul who had been mocked, dismissed, or betrayed by those they loved most. Later that evening, back at the motel, I packed my bags. Evelyn sat with me, smiling for the first time in weeks. "You did it, Margaret," she said softly. "You didn't just survive Clara. You destroyed her power." I nodded, but there was no triumph in my heart, only a quiet peace. Clara had lost, yes, but so had I. I had lost the son I once believed would protect me. I had lost the illusion of family. As I zipped the final bag, Evelyn touched my hand. You also gained something. You gained yourself back. Her words settled in me like a bomb. She was right. A week later, I stood at the gate of my own home. The locks had been changed back, the documents restored in my name. The garden, though neglected, still bloomed defiantly. I walked inside, inhaling the familiar scent of the house I had built with my late husband. It was mine again. Not because Clara allowed it, not because Daniel defended me, but because I fought for it. I sat at the old dining table, the one where Clara once mocked me, where Daniel once laughed at my expense. I traced the grain of the wood with my fingers, a smile tugging at my lips. They mocked me at this table. They thought their laughter could erase me. But in the end, I was the one still standing. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to Daniel, not to Clara, but to myself. You are not weak. You are not disposable. You are stronger than every betrayal, louder than every insult. And when they told you to sit back and watch, you chose to stand and fight. I folded the letter, placing it in the drawer of the table. A reminder for the future, for the days when memory might waver. Because I knew this, Claire's war was over, but my story was only beginning.